Hi, my name is Tony Byrne of Tony Talks Money. I've been a financial planner and in latter years a fund manager for the best part of 39 years now. So what I'm going to do is talk about how you can become wealthy investing in shares. The advice I'm giving you isn't just for experienced investors. You can be a first timer. This might be the first shares you ever buy. And this isn't based just simply on study or just advising clients. It's also based on my own experience because I've been investing in shares for a very long time. So without any further ado, I'm going to go into a number of points here. The first one is buy shares in businesses you know, like and use. I invested in Netflix about a year ago, and on this particular occasion, I didn't really spend time analysing the shares. You don't always need to put a lot of technical analysis in. If you know the company you're dealing with and you're very happy with their service and you think it's a really good service or product, for example, like how you use Amazon and you know how quick they are at delivering. So if you're happy with them, you might want to invest in Amazon, for example. I chose Netflix because I always like the Netflix series, and what I really like is that they've got their own content. So I thought, well, I'll invest in Netflix, and I did. And I'm pleased to say my investment in the last 12 months is up 75%. So do have faith in what you invest in. Right. Next thing is make sure you understand the company and its products or service. So in other words, don't invest in something that's highly technical that you don't understand. You'll probably become a cropper if you do that. Best to do something you understand. So I did use the example of Amazon just now. We all know pretty much what Amazon does. You can buy no end of goods or services on Amazon, and you know it'll get delivered to you the next day. So that's another example of a company you probably understand fairly well. So try and keep it simple. It's no point investing in something you don't know. You probably will make a mistake. The other thing I would do is don't own too many shares. What you find is fund managers will typically have 50 to 100 shares in their portfolio, but they'll have a whole team of researchers. But as an individual, especially if you've got a full-time job, you can't possibly know more than 10 companies very well. So I would keep your share portfolio down to between 5 and 10 shares and make sure you know them inside out. Read everything you can on them, study them, experience their product or service if you can. I know it's not always possible. Make sure you really understand them and keep up to date with your knowledge of them because things can change. A company that's very popular today might suddenly have a product or service that's no longer viable. It might not work anymore. So do keep on top of it, but get to know them very well. You'll be an expert and you'll know better whether you should retain the shares or not. Another classic thing to do, I know it might sound obvious, but not to everybody, don't invest in companies that have a lot of debt. Always invest in companies that have either low debt or no debt. And the reason for this is that one of the largest reasons for company failure is high debt levels because you've got all that interest to pay and capital repayments to pay. So some of the biggest corporate failures in history have been companies with huge levels of debt. So do try and avoid that. One of the most famous ones I can think of is Enron, but that was probably 20, 30 years ago now. And there have been other cases like that, Maxwell Corporation, and many others over the years that have gone bust because of too much debt. Another thing to do is only invest in companies that are growing significantly every year. And when I say significant, what I mean is they're growing by 20% or more a year. We call it CAGR or compound annual growth rate. And when I say growth, primarily we're looking at revenue, the top line, the sales figures for the year. If it's growing by 20% a year or more, that's a really good sign. Now, it is better if the company is also profitable. Just making 20% a year or more revenue is no good if they're loss making. So you do need to take a look at the accounts, or you can. There are various research websites on. You can just search them. Many sources of finding the results of companies. You don't need to be an accounting genius, but it does help if you've got some knowledge of numbers to see that it's growing a lot. Another big advantage is if the company has what is called a competitive advantage. We call it a strong financial moat. So imagine a castle with water all around it, It's very difficult to penetrate that castle. You need companies who've got those metaphoric moats or castles where they can't really be invaded. And you're looking for companies that it's very hard to compete with them because they've got a unique product. And Apple's one of them, for example. Although, yes, they're in the same market as other mobile phone companies, but Apple's not a mobile phone company solely. What makes them have a competitive advantage is that their products are quite unique. So you don't have an Apple mobile phone, you have an iPhone. You don't have a tablet, you have an iPad, okay? You don't have a laptop, you have a MacBook. So they're quite clever. Not only do their products look unique, they've got unique names. So they're not trying to be the same as everyone else. So even though Apple doesn't dominate the mobile phone market, they don't have the most sales, for example. They probably only have about 20% of the market. But what they do have is they capture about 90% of the profits of the mobile phone industry, which I find is quite remarkable because they're able to charge higher prices because they have unique products. So that's the thing you're looking for, some competitive advantage. It could be, competitive advantage might be based on price. It might be based on technology they've got. It might be too expensive to find an alternative competitor to use, for example. They might have speed of service that no one else can compete with. It could be any one of a number of things. It might be multiple things that other companies find it a struggle to compete with them about. So that's why you want to look for those companies with that unique edge, ones with great financial moats. Now, again, you don't need to be an expert on investment analysis, but there are lots of what I call metrics, lots of descriptions of good ratios and metrics that make a good company, but there are literally dozens and dozens of them. You don't need to know them all. Two of the most important metrics are something called ROIC, which means return on invested capital. On any set of accounts of the company or any analysis site, they'll give you the figure. You haven't even got to work it out. And something else called a low PE ratio, that's price to earnings ratio. Now, this was made famous in a book by a legendary author and investor called Joel Greenblatt. And it was called The Little Book That Beats the Market. And basically what he did was he focused on just selecting companies that had both high return on invested capital and low price earnings ratio. And he produced phenomenal returns for about 30 years. He was producing 29% a year returns, which is just remarkable. He kept it really simple. There are many, many other ratios and metrics you could use, but just those two alone proved really fantastic. And you can even go on his website. If you Google it, he even gives you a list of the top 50 or 100 shares that meet this criteria. You could even create your own portfolio doing it. Can't get easier than that, can it? Another thing to do is favour companies that buy back their own shares. In other words, they eat themselves. You might think, why would you buy companies that do that? Well, the reason why, think about it. Let's say you've got a company that's got 1,000 shares and it's worth £1 million. Well, if that company buys back 10% of those shares, then it's still worth the same amount of money. So that means that you've suddenly got a boost there. The company's still worth the same amount of money, but there's less shareholders like you. So the value of your shares is worth more. So I do like finding companies that buy their own shares. Some companies have bought back lots of their own shares over the last 5, 10, 15 years. That's always a good sign. So look out for those kind of companies too. Another thing to do, which is related to this buying back your own shares, is avoid companies that pay dividends. Now, this might surprise you, my saying this, but if your company pays dividends, then basically they're taking money out of the company and giving it away. Now, I know you're one of the owners if you own shares and you're getting dividends, but if you're taking money away, they could instead spend that by growing the business, investing it back into the business or buying other businesses to grow the company, make it grow more. But if they're giving it away to shareholders as dividends, then they've got less money to grow the company. That's called capital allocation, is how you invest the money that a company makes. There's lots of ways of investing it. And I happen to think that paying dividends is not a good idea. Now, the greatest giant tech companies in America, most of them pay little or no dividends at all. And it's no surprise that this magnificent seven, virtually no dividends paid between the top seven companies. There are a little bit that's paid, but not much. Most of them pay nothing. It's no surprise they become the biggest companies in the world because they keep reinvesting the money into the business. It just makes sense. And the other thing is for tax reasons. You pay less taxes if it's a capital gain. In other words, you sell the shares, make a profit. You pay lower taxes than if you take the income as dividend. Dividends are taxed higher in most parts of the world. Not every country, but certainly in the UK, you pay a lot more tax on dividends, especially if you're a higher rate taxpayer, than you'll pay on capital gains if you sell the shares. So that's another reason for it, not very tax efficient. Also, look out for companies that are still run by visionary founder owners. And a great example of one is Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame. We know he still owns 10% of shares in Amazon. It would be a lot more, but he unfortunately got divorced. So his wife received about a third of his shares. But Jeff Bezos still owns 10% and he's still working for Amazon. This is a really critical thing because what happens if you're the founder owner, you've got a passion for that company, you still got a stake in the company, you won't do anything bad against the shareholders because you're one of them. You're not going to screw yourself. And also, the thing about these visionary founder owners, they have long-term plans for the business. So Jeff Bezos will have plans that will go for decades ahead. Whereas if you don't own any shares, you're not a founder, you're more interested in short-term benefits, such as the latest quarterly reports. You might not have any shares, so you maybe don't take as much care over the shareholders because you're not one of them. It's inevitable. If you've founded the company yourself, you've got skin in the game, you own shares in the company, and you've got long-term vision and passion, then those companies tend to be better run and get better results. Privately owned companies, family-owned companies, statistically get better results long-term than ones that don't have those kind of owners. Also, focus on the quality of the management of the company. I use Jeff Bezos as an example. There's many other examples. Bill Gates, Mark Leonard of Constellation Software is another great example. You're looking at people, particularly visionary founder owners, which I mentioned earlier, but you're looking for people that have got the best interests of the company at heart, and they're long-term investors, and they're quality managers of the business. Typically, they don't spend a lot of money. Like Mark Leonard's a great example because he founded Constellation Software, and he doesn't take a salary from the company at all. He's a very wealthy man, by the way. And he used to just claim expenses. But after many years of running the business, he got fed up having to travel standard class on aircraft. So he decided he wanted to go first class. But he didn't want the shareholders to have to pay for his fare. So when he goes on a business trip, he goes first class and he pays for the fare himself and doesn't claim back expenses. I always think this is a great example of a manager or an owner or a director who is really caring about their shareholders, that they're that selfless that they won't even claim back expenses or a salary. So that's a good sign to look out for. Warren Buffett, for example, one of the richest men in the world, been doing this for a long time. He's in his 90s now. He still only pays himself $100,000 a year. And you get examples of companies where they're paying directors, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year, sometimes $100 million. And yet one of the wealthiest men in the world pays himself $100,000 and others pay themselves zero. There was a great story I once read about Warren Buffett. He went to a fast food restaurant with another investor, just took him out for a simple, cheap lunch. And Warren Buffett, who's worth over $100 billion, went into his wallet and took out some discount vouchers for that store and got a discount on the food. I mean, I think it's a bit extreme personally, but it just goes to show this is a man who believes in frugality, being modest, not wasting money. It's probably gone a bit too far, But nonetheless, it's a good sign, because it means he won't waste his own money, he won't waste the company's money either. That goes to show that they're humble people. They're not just in it for themselves. They're looking after shareholders. Always look for companies that are looking after shareholders, because you'll be one of them. The other key thing is, there's this old saying, isn't there, that your customer's always right. Well, actually, that's not true. Customers aren't always right. And people think you should put your customers first. But no, always put your staff first. Because if you look after your staff, they will look after your customers. So in a way, you are confirming that it's looking after your customers, but do it from the point of view you're looking after your staff first. Because if you've got great staff, they will stay with you long term. They won't need constant training. Well, they still need training, but they won't need to be trained as first timers to learn everything about the business. They already know it. They'll be more productive than new employees. And you'll get better returns as a business, even though your salary and benefit costs will be higher than other companies because you've got first-class staff. But you'll need less of them, and they'll bring in more revenue for you. Now, what's an easy way to find out what the staff think of the company? Well, the great news for you is there is a service called Glassdoor, which is a review website. Think of TripAdvisor for reviews of, say, restaurants and hotels. Well, Glassdoor is reviews given by current and past employees. If they give great reviews of the company, there's great probability that that's a very well-run business that's putting its staff first. So do look out for companies with things like that as evidence. Another great sign I find is looking for companies that are dominant in their market. What you want to look out for when you invest in companies, don't invest in companies when they've got lots and lots of competition, because when you have a lot of competition, it drives down prices. So if you've got to drive down your prices, your sale prices, then that drives down profits. So you have minuscule profits. What you want to go for, unashamedly, first and foremost, invest in companies that have monopolies. Now, there aren't many that have monopolies, but if you've got a monopoly, you can charge, I won't say charge what you like, but you've got less competitive pressure to reduce prices. You've got more liberty to increase prices and make more profit. Now, it's very difficult to find a monopoly, but if you can't find a monopoly where one company dominates, you might be lucky to find, say, a duopoly. Now, a monopoly I think of as, say, Google, for example. They've got several monopolies, which I can explain in a moment. And another industry, like the credit card industry, if you're looking at MasterCard and Visa, for example, that's an example of a duopoly. These companies make money on every single card payment you make by credit card. Every payment, they make money. It might be a tiny percentage. That's a duopoly. Only two companies dominate that market. So that, again, means they can be very profitable. And failing a duopoly, if you don't have monopoly or duopoly when two companies dominate, you have an oligopoly where just a few companies dominate, maybe 3, 4, 5. Again, that's better than investing in a company that's got lots and lots and lots of competition. I'll give you an example. Let's say you walk down the high street and you see a load of family restaurants. Well, they've got so much competition. You know, how many people can afford to go out for a meal every single night of the week? You know, it's a difficult business to be profitable in. But if it's, an unusual one-off type of business, then it's better. So I'm thinking Games Workshop, for example, which is a fantastic business. I went to the city centre at Milton Keynes recently, and they've got one shop there, but there's no other shop like it. Because they don't just sell software games, they also sell these little like war figures, Warhammer I think it's called, which is they've got a unique online games, but they've got unique physical games that a lot of people like to invest in. Now, if you ask me which company to invest in, one of them a series of restaurants or one unique games company with one shop in Milton Keynes, I know which one I'd go for. And that's borne out by the company. If you look at the share price, it's done tremendously well for decades now. It looks a really good company. The other big factor in your favour is investing in smaller companies. Now, I know the trend in recent years has been what's called the Magnificent Seven, these 7 giant tech companies in America, but that historically is very rare. Normally, large companies don't do as well as small companies. All the data will show this over decades. You make far greater returns by investing in smaller companies than large companies. Now, that's not every smaller company. It's going to do better than every large company. But the best small companies, you'll make far greater returns even than the Magnificent Seven. And I do like this saying I read in a book by a legendary investor called Jim Slater. And he said that elephants don't gallop, but fleas can jump up to 100 times their body height. I think that's just a great example to explain what I mean. But I've since discovered from a little bit of research that, in fact, elephants can gallop. In fact, an elephant can gallop at 45 miles an hour, which is faster than any human being can run. And apparently fleas can jump up to 300 times their body height. Nonetheless, the example is still there. Focus more on investing in smaller companies. And as long as you do good research, you will probably get better returns in the long run than investing in large companies. Okay, just to help you, there are various resources you could turn to. I won't give you them all because there's too many. But there are, for example, there's something called Quality Investing, which is an email service. You can get free emails from them, but they're looking for you to subscribe. There's the Value Investors Club, which is free to join. You might want to watch a podcast that myself and my colleagues run, and that's the Intelligent Wealth Podcast, which you can find on Spotify, YouTube. We give lots of investment tips and ideas. It's not an advice site as such, but by listening to us, you can pick up a lot of ideas that can aid you in your own research. And we quite often pick one company to debate between the three of us, and I think you'll find that quite valuable. I hope you found that useful. So there's a few ideas there for you today. I hope you enjoyed them. Put the time and effort in, keep your portfolio small, and be patient. Hold on to these shares long term. Don't just try and keep dipping in and out of the market and trying to make short-term gains or minimize short-term losses. You have to be very, very patient with shares and ride all the rocky times when it goes up and down. But if you do, my friend, if you put your time and effort in, you'll make a lot of money by investing in shares and become very wealthy indeed. So best of luck there. Thanks for joining and watching this latest video. Hope you enjoyed it and look forward to you joining me again. Bye for now.